Alright, I said I wanted to do a separate video just to kind of expand a little bit on the Textus Receptus and Erasmus. So just wanted to share some things with you, because these next slides you're going to see kind of will lay out some facts and so forth. Erasmus, of course, is the scholar in 1516 who produced a Greek New Testament. He actually did it alongside a new Latin translation of the Old Vulgate. But let me read something to you and ask you a question. I'm going to read this quote and I want you to tell me who you think said it. It is not reasonable that the whole church, which has always used this edition and still both approves and uses it, should for all these centuries have been wrong. I pose that because that sounds a lot like some of the arguments that I hear from the King James only side. But what's interesting is the person who actually said that is a guy named Martin Dorp, and he was writing to Erasmus in regards to this new work that Erasmus was doing. And of course what he's doing is saying, you know, why are you trying to change the Latin Vulgate? Dorp went so far as to say, which again sounds very familiar to me, he said, if however they contend that a sentence as rendered by the Latin translator varies in point of truth from the Greek manuscript, at that point I bid the Greeks goodbye and cleave to the Latins. There are some King James only folks who say that same thing, saying that if the Greek differs from the King James translation, you should throw out the Greek. And that same kind of argument was put forth at that time of Erasmus. Trying to think some things I wanted to share about Erasmus. Erasmus had written to this guy Dorp one time, and he said, this is Erasmus's words now. He said, you must distinguish between Scripture, the translation of Scripture, and the transmission of both. What will you do with these errors of the copyist? So, you know, Erasmus is clearly indicating that they were copyist errors in the Greek manuscripts. Another thing is, Erasmus, when he was doing his Textus Receptus, which by the way, he did 5 editions. That's because he kept going back and kept editing his own work and putting it back out. But he lost my train of thought again. He had 6 Greek manuscripts that he was working with, and that's because that's really all that he could find. I mean, you know, most of them weren't around. You know, we have so many today because of archaeological finds. Just in the 1900s alone, many more were discovered. But what's interesting is, in his Greek manuscripts, he was missing the book of Revelation. To get the book of Revelation, he actually had to borrow a manuscript that was about 400 years old at the time, from a friend of his named Rushlin. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing his name right. I think it's Rushlin. But anyway, so he used that for the book of Revelation. But even in that manuscript, the last page was missing. So Erasmus had to translate from the Vulgate, translate it over into Greek, and that's what he used for the last few verses of Revelation. Anyway, I just wanted to point these things out because, I mean, these facts about Erasmus seem to either be overlooked or sometimes misrepresented by those on the King James only side. And again, I mean, you know, we have to follow the evidence. Where does truth lie? And if things are not being reported that are true, then, you know, obviously that, you know, that counts against that side of the argument. Erasmus said, no subject area depends more on languages than theology. He also said, with the help of Greek, many passages in the Vulgate have been restored that before were corrupt. Many passages have been clarified that before were misinterpreted by commentators of great renown. Much light has been shed on passages that before were covered by a cloud of ambiguity. Which I would like to get my hands on, to have a first-hand source for a lot of Erasmus's detail. And he had written, I guess it's like a commentary or something. It's called Erasmus's Annotations. So if you can get your hands on that, that might give you a first-hand source of much of this information that I'm sharing with you. Anyway, that was pretty much all. I was just wanting to point out about the Textus Receptus and Erasmus, and also just a note that it was like the third, I think it's the third edition of the Textus Receptus that was used by the King James. Because see, after Erasmus died, which he himself did 5 editions, after he died, some of his junior partners, Theodore Beza and Stephanus, produced, revised it again. And so that the King James used was the one that was done by Theodore Beza. So, he had made some changes to the work that Erasmus had done. Again, it just the point is that even with what they were working with the Textus Receptus, there was some textual variance. There were some questionable things that could be translated one way or the other, and they would flip-flop on that. I think that's important to acknowledge, because a lot of times the argumentation coming from the King James only side is that the Textus Receptus is a pure text, and that Erasmus put together. And again, I think a lot of times it's oversimplification, because there was not just one manuscript that was being used. I mean, now Erasmus ended up producing one manuscript, but like I said, even that was revised. And when I say revised, I mean there was changes made. It wasn't just spelling changes or printing errors. There was actual changes of phrases and words that was being used. So, and of course, in Erasmus's own time, he started traveling outside of England and seeking out more and more evidence. I think his first edition, he started with like 6 Greek manuscripts, but by the time his 5th, which was just done like right before his death, he had maybe gone up to like 10 or 12. So he was even gathering more information. He was doing with his Greek manuscripts exactly what textual scholars do today, is they pull the manuscript evidence together as a whole to try to get, the more evidence you have, the better the picture can be that that's put together, to see what the real scripture that is in the midst of it, actually says. So anyway, just some thoughts about the Textus Receptus and Erasmus. There's, it's a broad field. There's a lot can be said. Maybe some of the facts in this slideshow that's coming up next will help, flesh some of that out. But again, I'm just wanting to, with these commentary videos that I'm doing between the slides, is to interact with those facts, and like some of the facts I just presented to you, to show, why I'm not King James only. And it's because the facts, do not point me that way. So anyway, I appreciate you watching and giving ear and attention, and maybe these are helpful to you. I don't know, but this is the this is the case. This is the evidence that has persuaded me. So God bless.